exploration. The enchanting arts and crafts of Pakistan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and a very warm welcome to PTV World News. I'm Shahzad Qayyum with the top stories of this hour. Prime Minister Imran Khan says he is mulling over engage the estranged Baloch elements to address their grievances. Prime Minister Imran Khan says the future belongs to Gwadar, which is emerging as the focal point of development and ensuring prosperity for the entire country. President Dr. Arif Alvi confers Nishan-e-Imtiaz military upon Commander of Turkish Land Forces General Umid Dunder at a special investiture ceremony at Diwan-e-Sadr in Islamabad. Fencing along Afghan border will be completed next month. Interior Minister Sheikh Raashid Ahmed says electronic entry system will also be installed at Chaman border. Nation venerates Captain Colonel Sher Khan Shaheed on his 22nd martyrdom anniversary. DGI SPR says Pakistan Army is proud of the Kargil war hero. Taliban say any foreign troops left in Afghanistan after withdrawal deadline will be at risk as occupiers as the Taliban make rapid territorial gains, forcing government troops to flee to neighboring Tajikistan. Brazil and Peru hit the training field in Rio de Janeiro with both teams readying for their Copa America semi-final showdown late tonight. But that's all for the moment. For more details and live streaming, log on to our website, world.ptv.com.pk. You can find us on Facebook page with the name of PTV World and follow us on Twitter at WorldPTV. Coming up next is Politics Today with Farrukh Pitafi. Stay tuned to watch.
Heritage, traditions, strawberries and cream. Starting in 1877 at the All England Croquet and Lawn Tennis Club, the Wimbledon has hosted a gauntlet of champions with a peculiar sense of history. In the center court, many dreams were fulfilled. Hearts broken, success, celebrations, pain, agony, disappointment. Unlike any other Grand Slams, it is the tournament to relish. The sanctity, holiness and its cultural impact drive the champions home. Wimbledon 2021, June 28 to July 11, 2021. Live and exclusive on PTV Sports.
It's time for Isha prayers in Rawalpindi, Islamabad. People in other parts of the country may offer their prayers according to their local timings.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد
Sayings of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He who does not respect elders, does not have mercy on children, does not commend what is good, and does not forbid what is evil, is not one of us.
Hello and welcome to Politics Today. I'm Farrukh Pitafi. As they say, actually GB Shaw said there are two tragedies of life. One, to get your heart's desire. Not to get your heart's desire. The other one is to get it. For quite some time, the neighbors of Afghanistan have been demanding that the foreign forces leave the region and return. Now finally that day has arrived. We have seen that withdrawal has started. It is accelerating, and the word has it that it is going to conclude by mid-August, if not earlier. So what happens after that is a question that is very serious, because it seems that the Afghan government is no Jamestown. It doesn't seem to be surviving for that long, and if something goes south, what happens and what should Pakistan be doing? We are going to talk about all these matters and more, but before that our team has prepared a report for you. Do watch it, and then we are going to discuss it.
Departure of American and NATO troops from Afghanistan's Bagram Air Base on Friday marks the end of an era of failed national building and enforced democratization. The involvement and geopolitical games of foreign forces on Afghan soil have had a major part in destabilizing the country, preventing an organic evolution and political process from taking root. Emboldened by a series of victories, the Afghan Taliban have their eyes set on Kabul. The Western-supported Afghan government seems unable to defend the country, particularly without foreign support. Since May 1, the cloud of uncertainty started swirling around Afghanistan's future following the US and NATO forces' withdrawal from the Afghan territory. The Taliban have captured 69 of the country's 407 districts, including territory in northern provinces once seen as off-limits for the insurgents. The Taliban now hold 142 districts and are fighting for control of about 170 more. Last week, the insurgents seized Sher Khan Bandar, the main northern border gateway to Tajikistan. It is apprehended that a Taliban victory in Afghanistan could serve as a morale booster for the violent extremist organizations in Pakistan, rejuvenating their support base and earning them recruits and funds. A major worry in Islamabad is that about 6,500 Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan fighters currently based in Afghanistan may reconnect with the Afghan Taliban in the event of fall of Kabul. The security officials fear that instability in Afghanistan could spill over into Pakistan, and up to 7 lakh new Afghan refugees could come to Pakistan, which hosts 3 million of them already. In recent weeks, there has been a spurt in attacks on Pakistani security forces. Interior Minister Sheikh Raashid recently highlighted that 88% of the Durand Line has been fenced, which should enhance security. According to a statement issued by the Prime Minister office, Prime Minister Imran Khan told Iranian President-elect that the situation in Afghanistan could have serious repercussions for Pakistan and Iran, resulting in an influx of refugees towards the bordering areas of the two countries. In an opinion piece recently published in the New York Times, Prime Minister Imran Khan was of the view that the Pak-US relationship was at a watershed moment. PM underscored the need for a political solution in Afghanistan before the US left. Keeping policy options for Pakistan, the parliamentarians were of the view that Pakistan's ties with the US are set to undergo a major transformation due to the withdrawal of the foreign forces from Afghanistan and the growing competition between the US and China. It is worth noting that Pakistan's major strategic interest in Afghanistan is that the Afghan territory is not used against it.
Okay, you have watched the report. You realize it was a very comprehensive package. But here's a lesson from history. If you remember, during Afghan jihad, that was against the Soviet Union, we saw that all the Mujahid groups were fighting along each other, supporting each other. And later on, the moment the USSR actually withdrew, after that they started fighting among themselves. Right now, we are treating Taliban as an entity that seems indivisible, but there's always a chance that they can also fight among themselves as well. We are going to try to focus on all these matters and try to understand what it means for Pakistan, what it means for the region, and how can Pakistan avoid the past mistakes. In order to help us understand these issues in the studio, I am joined by Brigadier Retired Raashid Wali Janjua Sahab, who's acting president of Islamabad Policy Research Institute. Thank you very much, sir, for being part of the program. Next to him is Dr. Syed Muhammad Ali, who is Director Strategic Affairs of CAS. Thank you very much, sir, for being part of the program. From Washington, we are joined by Michael KUGELMAN, who is Deputy Director and Senior Associate for South Asia, Wilson Center. Mike, thank you very much for being part of the program. And Mehmood Jan Babar, Afghan Affairs expert, also a journalist of renown, joins us from Peshawar. Thank you very much, Babar Sahab, for your participation as well. Let me start with Michael KUGELMAN. Michael KUGELMAN, what is your reading of the circumstances at this moment, and what can be the impact? It seems that there is certainly going to be some huge influx of refugees that might actually impact the regional countries, especially the neighbors of Iran and Pakistan. Your take, sir.
Yeah, it's looking very bad. There's no sugarcoating. I think that we all expected that the U.S. forces withdrawal would increase the violence and allow the Taliban to make more gains, but it's almost like this whole process has been in rapid motion, that it's happening so much faster than many expected. And I think a big reason for that is just the Afghan security forces are completely overwhelmed, not just in terms of operationally and not in a position to engage the Taliban in battle, but also the morale is low. They don't have what they need. Many of them are short on food and water in the battlefield. So it's just a complete disaster, so to speak. And I think that the question is, what happens once the troop withdrawal is 100% complete? And it will be complete. I think it almost is 100% complete. The U.S. plans to leave, 600 or so troops there, but basically the withdrawal is complete. So the question is, what happens after it is complete? Will the Taliban take that moment to simply finish off the fight, or try to finish off the fight that it believes it's winning? Or will it be true to its word and then come to the Afghan government and say, well, look, the foreign occupiers are gone. Now we're ready to talk to you about a political settlement. Now, of course, if the Taliban did that, it would come into that type of scenario in talks with the Afghan government, where it would have a tremendous amount of bargaining power, and it would be in a position to get a lot of what it would want to get. So that would not necessarily be an ideal negotiation for the Afghan government. It would not be ideal at all. But clearly that's better than a continued fight. But I'm skeptical. I just don't see the Taliban deciding to lay down arms or be willing to talk while fighting anytime soon. I think it senses victory. It senses that it's getting closer, and it simply wants to finish the job. And you make a very important point that I think for Pakistan, the first major consequence of this withdrawal will be this refugee crisis. I think that Pakistan needs to be ready, unfortunately, for a large number of Afghans wanting to enter Pakistan, knowing that Pakistan has provided has let in so many Afghan refugees over the years and has been such a good host for so many years. But I know that Pakistan takes a bit of a different position now to the issue of refugees than it had some years ago. So Pakistan's going to be in a tough spot. So will Iran, so will Europe and other countries where Afghan refugees have...
Regarding Pakistan being in a tough spot, one can argue that Pakistan has always been in a tough spot when it comes to Afghanistan. But I'm going to come back to you, Michael. Hang in there. Let me come back to the studio. Let me start with you, Brigadier Saab. Your opening statement and assessment of what is going to happen in coming days.
Thanks, Farrukh. I think Afghan situation is quite fluid, and as you quoted J.B. Shaw, I'll quote Dickens. It was the best of time, it was the worst of times. It was epoch of belief and epoch of incredulity. You know, many are plans, many are projections have withered on the vine, on the Afghan, milieu. It's true that internecine warfare is on the cards, because the US decision to undercut Afghan government and do a direct agreement with the Taliban. So this clearly indicates that which way the wind is blowing. And ultimately it's a matter of time.
But the problem with wind is that it can change direction anytime.
It can. And the situation is such that Taliban, they have a very strong decentralized system of governance. And they are battle hardened, they have an ideology. There's a question of asymmetry of will. The government, Afghan National Security and Defense Forces, these are holding tenuous lines on the Pak-Afghan border. There are already reports that ANA has left those posts and TTA has occupied. So these all developments are quite portentous, and much will depend on how things develop from here onwards. And Afghan government, its ability to orchestrate organized withdrawal, even battle which is pitched against a force which is battle hardened.
It might not be there.
It might not be there. But the only thing I want to point out here is that we need to be cognizant of refugee crisis, but we should not overblow it, because I may be wrong, but when the first wave came in the 80s, post-Soviet withdrawal, those were the Pashtun community mostly, and because the areas that were affected, those were Pashtun. But this time around, it might be the other way around. So the scale and magnitude might differ.
All right. We are going to talk about refugees as well. My concern at this moment is you have been a soldier, right? I have my experience with warfare is mostly theoretical or limit to the game of risk, where usually cutting your losses and fortification is thought to be something that you do when you think that you are under pressure. At this, it seems that we might be thinking that Afghan government is losing. It might be withdrawing tactically to actually solidify whatever it has got. But let me bring in Syed Muhammad Ali Saab. Sir, your take, especially because you talk about, usually you give me answers in pointers. So I'm going to ask you about the possible outcomes, scenarios, if you please. What are the scenarios which might develop? One is, of course, Taliban taking over Afghanistan. There are many other things that can take place. What are those potential outcomes?
Thank you, Farrukh. I think multiple scenarios have been discussed over a period of time, but I think the most likely scenario I'm going to present to you is basically based on three simultaneous dynamics. Political dynamic, military dynamic, and diplomatic dynamic. Obviously, the dominant independent variable is the military situation, which is fast evolving on a hourly basis. And the rapid rise and advancement of Afghan Taliban is translating into growing insecurity and political weakening of the Kabul administration, which essentially is restricted to a few individuals now. You recall only a week ago, Abdullah and Ashraf Ghani Saab made a dash to Washington, and he did secure some some goodwill,
sound bites actually,
and some sort of support, political support. But tangibly, I don't expect some substantive military or political capital being invested by Washington in support of a crumbling house of cards that Kabul administration actually is. So what does that means? This political insecurity translates into, like Michael Kugelman rightly pointed out, the lack of commitment and lowering of morale of the Afghan national security forces to fight for a weakening house of cards. And that explains why in several areas the Afghan national security forces have surrendered without fighting or have actually attempted to flee, including to Pakistan or towards the northern borders as well. And that explains the lightning advancement of Afghanistan.
Sorry to cut you, I just wanted to draw a parallel. It sort of reminds me of the US conquest of Kabul and how Taliban actually behaved at that time. Because if you remember, they withdrew without wasting a second. So it seems that there might be some kind of fortification to fight another day, right? But that is a serious concern.
But as a student of strategy, let me share with you my fascination with a lot of wisdom in terms of the strategic acumen that Afghan Taliban have shown for 3 reasons. If you look at the map of Afghanistan, which
bring up numbers at the very end of the possible airtime
no, I'm not bringing numbers.
I have to actually
I'm just saying that if you look at the map of Afghanistan and the distribution of power is changing practically on an hourly basis. You look at the area which is under Afghan Taliban, it is surrounding Kabul. They are taking care of they're closing all the ranks and they are closing all the areas where they could possibly get logistical, military and other support. So they are isolating and the noose is tightening around Kabul. And the last dynamic is that Kabul administration is also closing their ranks. They are securing their forces, and we can see eventually a major battle for Kabul.
Right. Allow me to actually bring in the 4th guest who has been waiting patiently for his turn. Mehmood Jan Babar Saab, let me ask you, is the takeover of Afghan takeover of Afghan Taliban something that has been set in stone, or something else can also happen in coming days?
Actually, I don't think so that Taliban is going to take over Afghanistan as a whole. But the strategy, the Taliban strategy is indicated that the Taliban is in a hurry to take over as possible districts in Afghanistan. And when as happened in past, when the Taliban will come to the negotiation table in future, so they will be able to claim that they were having the most of the districts in control. So this is not going to happen to for the Taliban. It is possible for the Taliban to control the whole Afghanistan in this situation, because the Pakistan and the neighbors are going to intervene. There are reports that Pakistan is going to intervene with the help of Iran, Russia, and China to take over and to intervene to reduce the violence and to control the situation, because the Pakistan knows better that this refugee influx is going to come to Pakistan. And today, as reported by some of the good sources, that UNHCR and the Afghan Commissionerate in Pakistan had held meetings, and they have checked all possibilities if the influx is coming inside Pakistan. So the situation is going to deteriorate for Pakistan, and Pakistan is too much worried, and we are having the reports that Taliban are also...
Babar Sahab, let me very quickly ask you, because you brought up the refugee situation or possibility of refugee influx. How serious is this concern? Because we have a mixed panel here. One of the participants is saying that this time the area of impact might not be Pashtun. So there is a possibility that this influx might not come to Pakistan but go elsewhere, like perhaps Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, or in case of Hazaras to Iran. Your take on that?
Yes, most of in the Pashtun areas, Afghans are already living in Pakistan. You know, for the last 3 to 4 decades, and most of them have shifted to Pakistan after the Russian invasion in Afghanistan, and most of them are still living in Pakistan. They have one house in Afghanistan and the second family and house in Pakistan. So I don't see there are a good number of Pakhtuns inside Afghanistan who can cross Afghan border and come into Pakistan. They are already living in Pakistan. So and you see the violence inside Afghanistan this time is not in the Pashtun areas, and it is scattered and it is extended to the other northern Ilais areas and the Badakhshan, which is a clear indication that now this time the people of northern Ilais and Badakhshan and these areas are going to be the next refugees.
You're right. Michael Kugelman, there are two aspects which are very important. When you look at Pakistan's response, and there's concern about refugee influx as well. I would like you to actually respond to the statements earlier about whether there's going to be a serious influx or not. But I want to ask you about Pakistan actually fencing its border. It is said that Pakistan has managed to fence 88% of the border. Do you think it is enough to contain the backlash from whatever happens in Afghanistan?
Yeah, well, it certainly will help. And I know that this has been a process, a project of a number of years, a few years to fence off the border. And indeed, we've heard that it's almost done. But ultimately, I think it's going to be difficult to fence off the entire border just because some areas are so difficult to reach. The terrain is so rugged. So I don't think everything will be fenced off. And there's also the the question of whether you will be able to have some folks get in despite the fence being there, whether they work out backhanded agreements to get in, or whatever the case may be. There also have been some reports that the Pakistani Taliban, not the Afghan Taliban, the Pakistani Taliban has actually been able to destroy areas of the fence that it's been able to pass through to get back into Pakistan. That clearly is a concern if those reports are indeed true. But I think that the refugee risk is very real. I do agree with what the previous speaker said, that the refugee risk will be distributed geographically more so than it had been in the past, just because indeed the most violence has been away from the Pakistan border, in northern Afghanistan. So countries like Tajikistan could have a significant refugee crisis on their hands like they hadn't before. But I would argue that the broader state of play in Afghanistan is going to be that violence and instability will be on the rise everywhere, including in the south and the east. So I think it's inevitable that you will indeed have significant numbers of Afghans that would like to enter Pakistan. Hard to say how many, and indeed it may not be as many as some suggest, which I've heard numbers upwards of 500,000 or even more. I don't know. But the risk is very real. But very briefly, I think what Pakistan should look at doing here is indeed it has to be planning for this refugee crisis. But there's so many other things it could be doing too that could ease these risks, the violence, and reduce the chances of refugee flows and cross-border terrorism and all. One is that clearly Pakistan needs to continue pressuring the Taliban to reduce the violence. But it needs to do that in a way that it can start raising the cost for the Taliban if it does not comply with these demands to reduce violence. In other words, there needs to be more of an effort to give the Taliban an incentive to reduce violence, and as opposed to just waving it off as something it doesn't need to do. Secondly, I really think it's important, with the U.S. increasingly out of the picture, for Pakistan to work regionally with other countries, with Afghanistan's partners, to develop some type of common strategy, some type of common front to bring to the Taliban in order to pressure the Taliban to reduce violence and come back to the negotiating table. Now, the Taliban has repeatedly said that it would focus on peace once the foreign troops have left. And they're basically, the foreign troops have basically left. So now is the time to hold the Taliban to its commitment.
Right.
Pakistan.
Here's another question, because you spoke about Pakistan, why Pakistan should be working with Afghanistan's other neighbors and partners. First of all, it has to begin with working with Kabul. And given that we were talking about refugee influx and refugee crisis, bear in mind Pakistan has around 3 million Afghan refugees already housed in the country. And then Afghan NSA, while he was disparaging Pakistan, he also said something very intriguing and sad, that otherwise, if Pakistan doesn't cooperate, Afghan refugees can also start taking it out on Pakistan. Do you think that this kind of statements actually help the culture of trust, or it vitiates it?
No, I think it's very unfortunate. I mean, clearly it's essential for Kabul and Islamabad to be getting along better. That'll just, it'll strengthen the prospects for regional stability, and it'll also strengthen the prospects for the peace process, clearly, given the key role that Pakistan will play, given the relationship it has with the Taliban. It's essential. So these types of comments coming from the Afghan NSA are not at all helpful. Not at all. I think that's quite clear. And it certainly, I think, plays into fears in Pakistan that there is a security risk of letting in so many new Afghan refugees because of the risk, no matter how small, that you could have some militants among them. And I think your government has made reference to that risk just in recent days. So no, I don't think that helps at all. For a long time, the U.S. has been looking to Pakistan and Afghanistan to try to work closer together to reach some type of common understanding on policing the border and so on. At the least, that could help a bit, but I don't think so, given the current mood there.
Right, absolutely. Brigadier Janjua, it is important, the bit we are talking about. This statement, while whatever he said about Pakistan stands on one side, it created some kind of diplomatic situation also. But saying that 3 million people who are sitting inside your country and who might be otherwise helpless, right? They might start attacking you, actually puts them under pressure. This kind of selfishness. Do you think that it bodes well for the future of Afghanistan?
No, I don't think so. I think it's a very puerile statement, and coming from someone who knows that the ship is sinking. So we'll not dwell much on that. But coming over, I'll give you a soldier's perspective. I'll give you an analyst's perspective.
Both.
From the soldier's point of view, you know Trofimov and Brafman's book, Starfish and Spider. So Taliban are starfish.
Okay.
Non-hierarchical, decentralized, ideologically leavened, up against Spider.
Okay.
The centralized control, hierarchical.
Something to lose, actually. Yeah.
No specific ideological glue. That's the Afghan government at the moment.
Right.
Remember, this is not that Afghan National Army which was with Najibullah, which was battle hardened, trained. This is an army which was disintegrated once the Americans came, and they gelled together, a ragtag coalition. Desertion rate is greatest in the world. There is no ideological commitment. Training is, despite the best efforts of Americans, they poured billions, but they are nowhere. Up against them are 60,000 odd, that's what congressional research tells us, but maybe they are more on ground. They are decentralized. Mullah Habatullah and Yaqub, his financial and military czar. So they are controlling centrally, but they are not, micromanaging. It's the field commanders on the ground.
But
it's a
sorry to cut you, but this decentralization, does it not show you that it can become another post-Afghan jihad situation? Because they may start fighting among themselves.
That's a conjecture, because
it's a fear out of history.
It's a fear, but I don't think so. They're going to fight amongst themselves, because so far their ideological leaven has held very strongly. And look at the way these dominoes are falling. I mean, there are already reports that out of 4 or 7, 1/3 have already fallen. So it's a matter of time before Taliban they encircle Kabul, and maybe at that time, if they have learned their lessons well, they can stop short of going for a bloodbath and forcible capture of Kabul.
That's
maybe
a big if, is it not?
Maybe entering into kind of a negotiation mode.
Right.
So that's the part in Afghanistan. So now coming over to
Pakistan.
I put on my analyst hat. Pakistan's part. So at Pakistan's level, we need to take prophylactic responses. Like COVID, we've been spared. We did our best. So likewise, whether we think that a lot of Afghans are coming or not, we should be prepared. Our fencing is in order. Army has done a great job, minus few forts that are being given the final touch. I think our fencing is good, and fencing alone doesn't matter much.
Right.
We have the strength. Fence is being manned at great cost.
Right.
So that's an area where we need to concentrate now is the building internal resilience.
Okay.
And we need to reach out to those disaffected segments in our restive ex-FATA, which need to be placated, which need to be won over, so that any spoiler like India, which tries to fish in troubled waters, in cahoots with some global forces, does not get much space. One thing. Secondly, we must have a designated area from which we expect the influx, and we must have those areas demarcation, and we should not allow any further ingress.
Okay.
And
we are hardening Afghan border, right?
True.
There is another border that actually can be used as a revolving door. That is Iran's border, right? And the problem at this moment is, while we are fencing that too or hardening that too, there still a lot needs to be done. And then you're talking about Pakistani spaces which might be exploited by Indians. But there is the concern of ungoverned spaces which will always remain in Afghanistan because of geography, steep geography. TTP can actually come from there. So these concerns will actually really create a lot of trouble. Allow me to actually bring in Mohammad Ali Saab. Mohammad Ali Saab, two aspects. One, at this moment it seems that Pakistani analysis is looking at it through a black and white strip, where either one side is winning or the other is. There are factors or elements which are very important and very strong. No matter what you do, Dostum is going to be a larger than life element there, and that is not all. There are the monies that actually came to the country and went away. It didn't end up with the infrastructure or the army. So somebody was corrupt enough to filch it away. And a word has it that there are warlords who are surrounding sitting outside Kabul, and they're biding time. Now they have become billionaires, US dollar billionaires, right? And they're going to take up arms and start meddling the moment Americans leave. So it is not merely Afghan government versus Taliban, is it?
Absolutely. Very briefly, I think a very comprehensive analysis by Brigadier Janjua. I'll just say, when we look at the Afghan conflict, basically there are three conflicts which were afoot simultaneously. The first one was between the Western forces and Afghan Taliban, which formally concluded after the Doha Agreement. The second was between Kabul administration and Afghan Taliban, which we are fearing will escalate further with the departure of the Western forces. And the third one is what you rightly pointed out, is between the proxies and the spoilers, who are being sponsored by different extra-regional and regional forces. And that is why
that is the fourth point.
That is the most difficult thing to do. While and that is a very important aspect. I appreciate you bringing it up, because while the most of the focus of the analysts and diplomacy is trying to restrain the conflict between Kabul administration and Afghan Taliban, the third most murky, most devious or most dangerous aspect is the proxy wars between warlords who are being sponsored by spoilers and extra-regional forces. There is no political or diplomatic effort to engage them and persuade them. And that's where I'll briefly suggest 3 things which should be considered.
Right.
Number one, I think there is a very urgent need for all the neighbors of Afghanistan, Pitafi Saab, to at least have a foreign minister level conference in which all the neighbors of Afghanistan, with the possible addition of Russia as well, should sit down and look at the Afghan future post US withdrawal and try to learn from the mistakes which were made after the Geneva Accord, that there has to be a 3-step approach. First, every neighbor has a stake, let me frankly say on your show, in Afghanistan, and influence and leverage as well. Unless these are synergized to mutually and collectively come up with a security commitment not to interfere, it is not possible to reduce violence, number one. Number two, there has to be a financial commitment to disincentivize the war economy. Maybe perhaps a regional Afghan development fund or something like that.
But it
and
was
I think
the idea
Chinese can help
behind
that.
Istanbul conference, which didn't happen.
Istanbul conference, frankly, my view is somewhat different. I see it with a pinch of salt, because you must not overlook the statement Afghan Taliban made to the number of Turkish overtures of providing security to the Kabul airport, because they reminded the Turkish government that we are cognizant of the fact that you are part of NATO. And we expect you to depart with all the foreign forces. And secondly, since Mr. Dostum enjoys hospitality in Turkey, it also raises concerns and doubts in the minds of Afghan Taliban. So we should not overlook that.
I'm grateful for your suggestion. Brigadier Saab talked about ungoverned spaces and how to actually manage them. You are talking about engaging all the neighbors of Afghanistan, right?
Absolutely, because they are the ones who are actually going to suffer. Always
the future tense, one, and we are discussing this T-1 month. I mean, if we have left it this far out, do you honestly think in a month everything is fall in place?
No, it will not. But not to try is also not an option, because the consequences will be borne by everybody.
I tell you, somehow I've reading all the history of South Asia, I have started convincing myself that Murphy's law is law of physics in Pakistan and South Asia. Whatever can go wrong will go wrong. And the problem is that we have to actually start focusing on how to fix things. Very quickly, sir, I have to go to Babar Saab as well.
Yeah, you mentioned the regional security framework. That's absolutely vital.
But when?
Now.
The US goes.
Right now.
And other than that regional security framework, I think the United States needs to be engaged. We understand United States is the neighbor of every country in the world. We cannot simply say that wash our hands of United States. Do reach out to them. And you see, Lloyd Austin's statement of enduring military support to Afghan government is portentous. What happens if you...
How do you have that kind of support when Taliban is saying that none of the neighbors can provide any kind of logistic support, any kind of bases, and then none of the neighbors is ready? So how do you expect the magical enduring support by the US when it has no foothold?
But if that happens, if you are supporting a weak protagonist against a strong, you are prolonging the managed chaos. So I think we need to be cognizant and need to take USA also, along with the regional countries, on board about this.
Babar Saab, if you want to come in or comment on whatever was said, please do. And then, of course, I'm going to ask you a question as well.
Pitafi Saab, let me comment on the legitimate force inside Afghanistan. Unfortunately, there is no visible legitimate Kabul in the Kabul. There is a scattered crowd of some former rulers in Afghanistan. Honestly, we don't see any Afghan government on ground and in the situation. There are people who are busy in blame game, and they are blaming Pakistan and they are blaming all others. But they are not going to take the responsibility for the situation which is now on the ground. So this is the main problem. Taliban are the when we compare the legitimate force inside Afghanistan, this time the Taliban claims and the Taliban statements are more responsible when it compares to the NASA's and the Afghan forces. They want others to rescue them. They want the neighbors to come and rescue the Afghanistan, and they are still unable to come and rescue their people on their own, which is it is a proof that they were not able to handle the situation. Why this was the claim was made by the Afghan forces and the Afghan government that they are ready to control and fight the forces whoever will come to take over to try to take over Afghanistan. And this is a situation that hundreds of thousands of videos are coming from inside Afghanistan, that Afghan forces are surrendered to Taliban without fighting, and without firing a single shot. So it is the proof that they have not done whatever they were supposed to, and this is the reason that.
Babar Sahab, let me ask you to extend your comments into a conclusion, because I'm told that we have to start concluding the program. Can you conclude your comments? Then I can take conclusions from other guests as well. Please go ahead.
I think that there should be an immediate Alwa Jirga inside Afghanistan, and all the Afghan factors should join this Alwa Jirga, supported by the neighbors and the international forces.
Right. That's a very pithy conclusion. Let me go to Michael KUGELMAN. Your conclusion, Michael.
I think that we all have to play to the Taliban's desire for international legitimacy and recognition, right? The Taliban believes it earned international legitimacy when it got its agreement with the U.S. And I think what you need now is for all key players, Pakistan, the U.S., the regional players, all essentially to pressure the Taliban and say, well, look, you're going to lose any recognition or legitimacy that you think you have if you don't lower the violence and if you don't agree to talks. You're not going to get any assistance. You're not going to get any recognition. I think that's all we have. I mean, the U.S. has lost much of its leverage now that it's removing its troops. I think that the idea is to play to this issue that the Taliban really wants that legitimacy and recognition. I think that's what it comes down to. And indeed, you need to have the regional players coming together in their own initiative. But I think, quite frankly, the elephant in the room, if you have that initiative, you need to have India involved in that as well. India is a key player in Afghanistan, not just because of its ties to Kabul, but because of its former ties to the Northern Alliance. It's one of these key players, along with Iran.
I thought that this might come up, but it came at the fag end of the program. So we won't be able to engage on this last bit, but in coming days, we are going to discuss it as well. Let me ask the two guests in the studio, Brigadier Sahab, your conclusion, sir.
My short conclusion is that we should brace for the fallout, but we should not panic, and we should also eschew loudspeaker diplomacy.
Right.
It's best to keep our comments at diplomatic level nuanced and engage with all the stakeholders.
With 50 plus news channels in the country, with so many politicians actually jockeying for the airtime, and with so many newspapers, good luck with avoiding loudspeaker diplomacy.
We should engage United States and all the regional countries immediately.
Right. Absolutely. Ali sir, your conclusion.
4 things we need to do simultaneously. Diplomatically, like I earlier pointed out, we should arrange and hold a foreign minister level conference of all the neighbors who should mutually come up with a commitment on the respective stakeholders and constituencies within Afghanistan to achieve peace. Secondly, there should be a tangible international lasting economic commitment. And perhaps China and Russia should consider their contribution, because it consider this as a insurance for the future of BRI and CPEC.
Right.
Number three, Pakistan should really unite itself and focus on border security and internal security, because those outfits and entities who can exploit this environment should not harm our economic and internal security. That is the most important thing.
When I listen to experts like you all, I feel that we are in this ideal place where sky is the limit. But then history actually comes in the picture and reminds me that none of this usually happens.
Hope we learn from history. We hope we learn from history.
Different. But let me thank all the guests one by one. Brigadier Retired Raashid Janjua sir, thank you very much sir for being part of the program. Syed Muhammad Ali sir, thank you very much for your precious time. Michael KUGELMAN, thank you very much. You always bring your A game. Thank you very much for being part of the program as well. Mehmood Jan Babar sahab, thank you very much for your precious time as well. We have talked about this issue in coming days. Of course, perhaps most of our programs will be focusing on the Afghanistan and the situation that is going to emerge, because it is something that is now evolving very quickly. But the problem right now is that while we can hope and expect that better angels of our nature are going to prevail, at this moment when you look at history, history tells us that usually everything ends in bedlam. And that's why countries like Pakistan can perhaps do two things. One, of course, the border, which is very important, but clarity of mind is also important what to do. And that's why we have seen that a lot of things have happened. Our intelligence community has started networking. There has been launch of a committee that actually integrates intelligence. Then we have seen briefing to the lawmakers, the Prime Minister and others. That is very heartening, right? But let me take you back to a few years when we had agreed on National Action Plan, where lies every solution possible. You can de-radicalize, you can do away with all the ungoverned spaces or potential ungoverned spaces, and then you can take care of whatever happens in Afghanistan. First, save your country. This is the consensus of more or less all the participants. Let's hope in coming days we see the country pulling itself together and focusing on the threats or challenges that are there. This was today's program. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.